Someone in your life right now fits one of these three profiles. You already feel it, you just can't name it yet. Three personality types that psychologists didn't formally identify until 2002, but Rome was producing them 2,000 years before any researcher put a name to what they were watching. And the reason this matters to you right now, today, is not history. It's because these same personalities are operating in your office, your family, and your social circle, using the exact same tactics that collapsed an empire. By the end of this video, you will be able to identify all three in real time, and you'll know exactly how to defend against each one before they finish their opening move. The Dark Triad. Three distinct personality types: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Three types that share one defining quality: a complete absence of genuine concern for anyone outside themselves. They are not random, they are not rare. Research suggests subclinical Dark Triad traits appear across the general population at rates most people find deeply uncomfortable when they first encounter the data. These personalities have been climbing to positions of power since the first civilization built a throne for someone to sit on. Rome didn't just produce warriors and philosophers. Rome produced the most detailed, most extensively documented case studies of Dark Triad psychology in human history, what the historians of that era described as madness, cruelty, and political genius. Modern psychology can now name with clinical precision. What you are about to receive is the complete decoded file. Three types, three Roman case studies, and the one defense system that survived all of them. Before we go further, understand something critical. The person in your life who fits one of these profiles is almost certainly not an emperor. They are a colleague, a family member, partner. Rome gives us the extreme versions precisely because power removes the mask faster than anything else. Once you can identify these types at their most extreme, you will never miss them in the subtle. That is the entire point of what follows. And the first type is the one most people think they already understand. They don't. Personality type 1, the narcissist. Caligula. When Caligula became emperor of Rome at 24 years old, the city celebrated. Romans who had suffered for years under his predecessor Tiberius flooded the streets. He was charming, generous, and warm. He pardoned political prisoners. He abolished taxes. He threw money to crowds from his balcony. For the first 8 months of his reign, Rome believed it had found its ideal ruler. Then the mask came off. And here is the thing nobody talks about. What came off was not a disguise. It was a performance that had simply run its course. What was underneath had always been there. He had just needed the throne first. Caligula declared himself a living god, not metaphorically, literally. He ordered the heads removed from statues of deities throughout Rome and replaced with casts of his own face. He erected a life-sized golden statue of himself in the temple of Castor and Pollux, and had it dressed each morning in clothing that matched whatever he was wearing that day. He was so sensitive to how he was perceived that he ordered the tongues cut from anyone who spoke against him, then had them thrown to wild animals in the arena. He laughed while a priest he had struck during a religious ceremony died at his feet. He mixed iron shards into the coins he threw to the crowds. Generosity as a weapon, kindness as theater. Every act of apparent warmth was a transaction. Every act of apparent cruelty was a message. Both were calculated. Neither was personal. That last part is what most people get completely wrong about narcissists. They think it's personal. It never is. Clinical narcissism at its core is not arrogance. It is a compulsive need to be seen as exceptional because the alternative, being ordinary, being ignorable, being wrong, is psychologically intolerable. The charm is real. The early generosity is real. What is not real is the motivation behind it. Everything is transactional. The warmth lasts exactly as long as you serve the reflection they need. The moment you stop serving that reflection, the moment you disagree publicly, outperform them, or simply stop being useful, the warmth doesn't fade. It vanishes completely overnight. And the speed of that reversal is what makes it so disorienting. It feels like a different person. It is not a different person. It is the same person, finally seen clearly. The signals are consistent. Their stories always position them as the most important, most wronged, or most impressive person in every room they have ever entered. Criticism, even gentle, well-intentioned criticism, produces a response that is wildly disproportionate to what was said. They require constant emotional management from the people around them, and that management flows in one direction only. You maintain them, they do not maintain you. That exhaustion you feel after sustained proximity to this type is not coincidence. It is the measurable cost of being treated as a mirror rather than a human being. Caligula ruled for 4 years before his own Praetorian Guard assassinated him in a corridor of his own palace. In your life, the exit comes earlier, but only once you can name what you are looking at. The second type is harder to spot, significantly harder. because unlike Caligula, this one never loses control. Personality type 2, the Machiavellian, Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar formed the first triumvirate with Pompey and Crassus, the two most powerful men in Rome, not because he trusted them, but because he needed them temporarily. From the moment the alliance formed, Caesar worked to ensure it would never be used against him. He kept Pompey and Crassus suspicious of each other at all times, jealous of each other, competing for his favor while he appeared to favor both equally, told each one things about the other that were carefully selected to generate doubt without being verifiable. Neither man realized they were being actively managed. Neither man recognized that the greatest threat in their alliance was the one standing quietly between them, smiling while they watched each other. By the time both understood what Caesar actually was, the window for collective action had already closed. Caesar had made sure of that years in advance. This is the defining signature of the Machiavellian personality, and it is the one that the other two types completely lack. Not impulsive rage, not grandiose self-promotion, cold, patient, strategic manipulation that operates so far beneath the surface that most people cannot see it until the outcome has already been determined. The Machiavellian personality is characterized by a cynical view of human nature, a total absence of moral commitment as a genuine operating principle, and a long-term planning capacity that makes them categorically more dangerous than the narcissist or the psychopath in sustained environments. They do not need to be the center of attention. They do not need public recognition. They need outcomes, and they are willing to wait as long as it takes to engineer them. Here is the thing that makes this type almost impossible to defend against without the right framework. They look like the most trustworthy person in any room they enter. Caesar crossed the Rubicon into Italy at full military strength, into a completely unprepared enemy. Pompey, the most powerful military commander Rome had produced, fled the city without fighting a single meaningful battle. Caesar had not defeated him that day. He had defeated him years earlier, in private conversations, in managed alliances, in the careful and patient accumulation of leverage that no one had been watching closely enough to map. The sword finished what the psychology had already won. The Machiavellian in your environment is the hardest of the three types to identify because they present as the most functional, often charming when charm serves a purpose, but not dependent on it. They remember everything, not because they are naturally warm and attentive, but because information is infrastructure. They give you information calibrated to what builds their current position. They are skilled at making their goals appear to align perfectly with yours, and that alignment holds with remarkable consistency right up until the moment it no longer serves them. Then it ends, cleanly and without emotion, because there was no emotional investment in it to begin with. Instability is visible, calculation is not. That invisibility is the weapon. Watch what happens to people who stop being useful to them. The relationship does not deteriorate, it simply ceases. No confrontation, no explanation, no discernible transition. One day you are part of their world, and the following week you are not, and they feel nothing about it because there was nothing to feel. Watch how they position themselves when conflict arises between others. They are almost never directly involved. They are adjacent, available to both sides, the calmest, most reasonable presence in the room, while managing, with precision, which direction the conflict resolves. Caesar did this to an entire republic across 2 decades. The person doing it in your workplace looks like the colleague everyone trusts most. The third type is the most unpredictable, and the most likely to be sitting right next to you without either of you fully knowing it yet. Personality type 3, the psychopath, Commodus. To understand Commodus, you first have to understand his father. Marcus Aurelius was the philosopher-emperor, a man who wrote his private meditations as personal guidance for maintaining virtue under pressure, never intending anyone to read them. He was considered the last of the 5 good emperors, the ceiling of what Roman civilization could produce in a single human being. His son Commodus was, by the consensus of every historian who documented his reign, the most precise possible opposite in every measurable category. The contrast between them is not incidental, it is the entire lesson. Commodus assumed sole power at 18 and immediately abandoned the Danube military campaigns his father had spent years prosecuting. He returned to Rome and began dismantling everything Marcus had built, not through political strategy, not through ideology, but through pure impulsivity, operating without restraint. He renamed Rome after himself, Colonia Lucia Annia Commodiana. He renamed the 12 months of the year after himself. He renamed the legions, the Senate, and the Roman people after himself. He declared himself the earthly reincarnation of Hercules and fought in the arena over 700 times against opponents who were not permitted to actually injure him, then declared each performance a historic military victory. When a slave failed to heat his bath to the correct temperature, he had the slave executed. He was strangled in his own bath on December 31st, 192 AD, by a conspiracy that included his Praetorian prefect, his personal chamberlain, and his mistress. The people closest to him, the people who had survived 12 years inside his orbit, finally calculated that the risk of acting was lower than the risk of one more day of proximity. That calculation tells you everything about what those 12 years had actually been. Here is what separates the psychopath from the other two types in a way that most psychology content completely misses. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the daily effort required to act with virtue, the active, ongoing struggle to restrain impulse, the discipline that had to be consciously maintained every single day or it would erode. Commodus required no equivalent effort in the opposite direction. The cruelty was not something he chose over restraint. There was no restraint to choose over. The internal mechanism that in most human beings converts experience into behavioral adjustment, the part that registers consequences, generates guilt, and produces the corrective response, was simply not operating in the way it operates in normal psychology. This is not a moral judgment. It is a structural observation. And it is the most important thing to understand about this type, because it completely changes how you need to interact with them. The psychopathic personality in your environment will rarely present at the Commodus extreme, but the signatures are consistent regardless of scale. They are charming in direct proportion to what they currently need from you. And that charm is produced without the internal cost it carries for normal people, which means it can be sustained longer and deployed more convincingly than genuine warmth. Watch for the complete absence of residual guilt after causing harm. Not the performance of guilt, which they can produce on demand and often do, but the actual behavioral change that genuine guilt produces. Watch for the pattern that repeats without adjustment, the same behavior, the same justification offered each time with identical confidence, as if the previous outcome simply did not register. That repetition without learning is not stupidity. It is the signature of an internal system that processes experience differently than yours does. Stop for a moment. Someone came to mind while you were reading one of those three profiles. Maybe more than one person. Maybe the same person appeared across more than one type. You are not being paranoid. You are pattern recognizing. There is a meaningful and important difference between those two things, and the difference is this. Paranoia is untethered from evidence. What you just did was match documented behavioral patterns against lived experience. That is not paranoia. That is intelligence operating correctly. The patterns Rome documented 2,000 years ago are sitting in your life right now. The names are different. The scale is smaller. The psychology is identical. Here is how you defend against all three. The defense. The only defense system against all three dark triad types that has been documented, tested across centuries, and survived is not a modern psychological framework. It comes from the same Rome that produced Caligula, Caesar, and Commodus. Marcus Aurelius, writing privately for himself with no intention of publication, described what the Stoics called the discipline of perception, the systematic practice of seeing what is actually there before deciding how to respond to it, not reacting to the presentation, responding to the pattern. That distinction is the entire defense. Against the narcissist, the defense is withdrawal of reflection, executed quietly, not dramatically. Stop providing the validation at the volume they have come to expect. Maintain neutral responses where you previously offered admiration. Do not announce this change. Simply make it. The narcissist is not attached to you as a person. The narcissist is attached to the specific function you provide. When that function changes, the relationship reveals its actual architecture within days. What you observe in that window tells you everything you need to know about what you have actually been dealing with. Against the Machiavellian, the defense is information architecture. They build leverage from what you give them, patiently over time, storing it until the moment it becomes useful. The counter is calibrated sharing, enough to maintain the relationship without friction, never enough to create a position they can use against you. Do not make the withholding obvious. That signals awareness, which they will file and adjust for. Make it natural. Share at a level slightly below what feels socially normal, and watch where the information you do share travels. The path it takes reveals the operation. Against the psychopath, the only reliable instrument is time. A single interaction can be charmed. A pattern across months cannot. Extend your evaluation window significantly before making any decision of consequence about trust or access. The psychopathic personality is optimized for initial impression. The warmth, the confidence, the sense of immediate connection are produced without internal cost, which means they are available on demand at full intensity. Time strips that optimization away. Watch what stays consistent and what shifts as the need for sustained impression management increases. The pattern that emerges is the truth. Rome did not fall because of external armies. Every historian who has studied the collapse in depth arrives at the same structural observation. The most dangerous personalities in the empire's history were operating at full capacity inside the walls, while the attention of the civilization was directed outward. The senators who recognized what Caligula was did not move until he had systematically removed enough of them to make coordinated resistance impossible. The allies who mapped Caesar's operation did not act until he had already divided them past the point of effective coalition. The court that surrounded Commodus endured 12 years of escalating exposure before the calculus finally shifted. In every case, the delay was not ignorance. It was the paralysis that comes from seeing clearly but not yet having the language or the framework to act on what you are seeing. You now have both. You have the names for what you are looking at. You have the behavioral signatures for each type across 2,000 years of documented evidence. You have the specific defense protocols that work against each one. The most dangerous person in any room is not the loudest, the most confident, or the most immediately impressive. It is the one who identified what everyone else is long before anyone thought to identify them. That person used to be rare. Now it can be you. Subscribe to Mentis Arcana. The doctrine continues.